They thought they controlled the game, that their shadows could stretch over every corner of your life. Every scheme, every whisper in the dark, every knife hidden in a smile. They believed it was untouchable. But tonight, the king of their nightmares stumbled, and for the first time, you felt the tremor ripple through the foundations they built. Chaos isn't coming. Chaos is already laughing at them, creeping into their bloodlines, and twisting the lines they drew so carefully. Power shifts when fear is confronted. They think it's theirs to hold, tightly clutched like a child gripping a fragile toy, believing no one could ever pry it from their hands. But fear is a mirror, a reflection of weakness they refuse to see. Every glance you cast, every smirk that dances along your lips, it fractures their illusion of control. You don't just challenge power, you stare into it, unblinking, and let it twist and writhe under the weight of your audacity. When they built their towers of influence, stacking loyalty and manipulation like bricks, they never imagined someone would walk through the front door, unafraid, unbothered, and unravel the mortar holding it all together. It isn't brute strength that topples kings, it's the unshakable presence of someone who doesn't flinch at the storm they conjured. You become the tremor in their foundation, the laughter that seeps into their council rooms and boardrooms, the whisper in the night that makes them question every alley, every plan, every heartbeat. Fear is the currency of power, and by confronting it, by looking it dead in the eye, you start to print your own notes stamped with confidence, audacity, and an unrelenting refusal to bow. They thrived in shadows, thinking their control absolute. But shadows crumble when someone steps into the light with a grin and a promise they don't even understand themselves. Their minions, once disciplined and sharp, begin to falter when they sense your resolve. Because fear isn't just a feeling. It's contagious, and courage, when wielded properly, infects faster than any deception ever could. Every rule they wrote, every boundary they drew, every silent threat whispered behind closed doors begins to bend, then crack, then collapse, and you watch the subtle panic bloom behind their eyes, realizing the fortress they believed impenetrable is nothing more than a house of cards swaying in a storm they never anticipated. Power is not about the size of your army or the depth of your wealth. It's about the courage to face what terrifies them most and walk forward anyway. The moment you confront fear, the dynamic flips, and suddenly you are not the outsider. You are the reckoning, the shadow that eclipses all their petty schemes. They built empires of manipulation, relying on secrecy and intimidation, but even the smallest flicker of defiance from the corner they thought unobservable begins to spread like wildfire. You don't need permission, you don't need approval, and you certainly don't need their consent to exist in their world on your terms. Power isn't given. It's claimed, often in ways that don't make sense until it's already too late for them to react. And the beauty of confronting fear is that it doesn't just shift power in one direction. It warps it, bends it, reshapes it, until they start to question not only their control over you, but over themselves, over the very reality they swore they dominated. Fear is the weapon they wield, but when you refuse to yield, it becomes a mirror reflecting every flaw, every insecurity, every crack they buried under arrogance. Each encounter becomes a performance, a dance where you lead, and they stumble, fumbling in the dark, unaware that their grasp on authority is slipping, unprepared for the audacity of someone who dares to stare at the abyss and smile in return. It's intoxicating, this reversal, this sudden taste of power that comes not from brute force but from presence, from daring to confront what they thought untouchable. And from that confrontation, the rules change, the scales tip, and the ground they thought solid begins to quiver under the weight of your defiance. Hidden enemies crumble under your rise. They've spent lifetimes weaving webs, spinning lies, hiding daggers behind smiles and handshakes, thinking their darkness is untouchable, thinking that no one would ever see the patterns, the cracks, the invisible strings they tug to bend the world to their will. But you move differently. You don't rush. You don't fight the current blindly. You flow through it, letting their own schemes choke them, letting their shadows trip over themselves while you remain untangled. Every whisper, every secret plan they buried deep becomes a witness to their unraveling. And the more they try to hide, the more exposed they become, like insects under a magnifying glass, squirming in the heat of attention they never imagined. They relied on fear, on intimidation, on the illusion that power is invisible until it hits them in the gut. And here you are, rising not with a roar but with a grin, letting the truth sneak past their defenses and rot the roots of control they cultivated with such arrogance. They thought their puppets were loyal, their networks unbreakable, their influence unassailable, and all it takes is a single spark of audacity for the entire construct to tremble. It's not about defeating them directly. It's about existing in a way that exposes their fragility, forcing them to react, forcing them to reveal themselves, forcing the carefully concealed cracks to split wide open. The higher they sit, the louder they fall, and your rise is the catalyst that turns their confidence into paranoia, their control into chaos. Every move they made, every ally they bought, every alliance they forged with the assumption of invisibility now turns against them, because you are the chaos they didn't see coming, the presence that refuses to bow to their authority. They thought they could remain untouchable while pulling strings in the dark, but you shine a light, not harsh and obvious, but insidious, creeping, showing their miscalculations in the smallest details, the misplaced trust, the overlooked rival, the underestimation of someone who doesn't play by their rules. Their schemes, once complex and frightening, unravel like threads in water, every calculated advantage slipping away as you rise higher, untethered by their fear, unbothered by their intimidation, untouched by their manipulation. Hidden enemies are the cruelest, the ones who smile while plotting, who seem harmless until their dagger lands. But when you rise, they begin to see the patterns they never accounted for, the strength they never measured, the patience and cunning that doesn't scream but waits, watches, and then strikes without warning, leaving them exposed, vulnerable, naked in the very web they believed unbreakable. The irony is delicious, the inevitability intoxicating. Every hidden foe, every secret opponent, every masked villain suddenly finds their world bending under a force they never recognized because they were too busy hiding behind fear and control. You don't need to fight them all at once. Sometimes, the mere act of rising, of existing without hesitation, of refusing to bow to their terror, is enough to collapse entire networks of deceit, to make the unseen tremble, to let the hidden cracks widen until the structure collapses from its own weight. It's a slow burn, a psychological precision that doesn't require loud declarations, just presence, confidence, and the unrelenting truth that they are no longer untouchable, no longer invisible, no longer safe in the dark corners they carved out for themselves. Each rise, each step forward, each refusal to shrink under their shadow is a small earthquake, and earthquakes have a way of exposing even the deepest tunnels, revealing hidden enemies to the daylight they despise and the chaos they cannot contain. Every plot has a breaking point. They think their schemes are eternal, that the intricate webs they weave will hold forever, that loyalty bought and fear imposed will never falter. But plots, no matter how cleverly constructed, are fragile when exposed to unpredictability, to someone who refuses to play by their rules, to a presence that laughs at their careful calculations. They plan in shadows, whisper in corridors, trade secrets as if currency, believing that the silence they maintain is unbreakable. But silence is only a pause, a prelude to the collapse they never anticipated. Every knot they tie in their network has a weak strand. Every manipulation depends on compliance. Every deception relies on ignorance. And when even a single element falters, the tension spreads like a crack in ice over water, invisible at first, then unstoppable. You move like a storm through the chaos they created, unseen yet undeniable, and the fragility of their design begins to show. They believed fear would secure their power, that intimidation would mask incompetence, that hidden agendas would remain hidden, and all the while, the pressure of their own ambition builds against the brittle framework they've constructed. Each lie told, each betrayal orchestrated, each whisper intended to control, now becomes a thread stretched too far, trembling under the weight of your defiance, ready to snap. They measure influence like a commodity, forgetting that influence is dynamic, reactive, and easily shattered by audacity, by observation, by someone willing to push the boundaries they thought inviolable. The longer a plot is nurtured in secrecy, the more brittle it becomes, because complexity breeds vulnerability, and they never calculated for the disruption of someone unafraid, someone who sees the cracks, the contradictions, the missteps hidden in plain sight. As you advance, as your presence becomes undeniable, the calculated chaos they relied upon begins to turn inward, consuming itself, unraveling their alliances, distorting their strategies, shaking the faith of those who serve them blindly. Each schemer begins to question their own design, doubting allies, questioning plans, fearing exposure, and the breaking point, once theoretical, begins to pulse with inevitability. It isn't the loudest blow that topples a plan. It's the accumulation of unanticipated resistance, the subtle, relentless pressure applied until the structure can hold no longer, until the illusion of control evaporates into panic. They built their empires on manipulation and secrecy, believing that time was their ally. But time is neutral, and every plot ages, every secret leaks, every trust fractures, and the longer they insist on maintaining their fragile control, the closer they draw to collapse. You don't have to attack directly, just your presence, your defiance, your refusal to be controlled or intimidated is enough to accelerate the fractures, to magnify every tiny weakness into a visible, destabilizing force. Each calculated move you make, each observation, each subtle provocation, adds pressure to a system they never designed to endure unpredictability. And as cracks form, alliances crumble, whispers turn to accusations, and paranoia seeps through the veins of their power, feeding the collapse they once thought impossible. Their plot was a masterpiece in their mind, an elegant design that would outlast time and opposition. But the very elegance makes it susceptible to disruption. The very precision makes it brittle. The very confidence in their perfection makes it laughably fragile under the weight of chaos. When someone rises who refuses to be intimidated, someone who exposes the weakness behind every mask, the plot begins to strain, and the architects of deceit start to realize, too late, that every system, no matter how intricate, has a breaking point, and the moment of rupture is more thrilling than any of them could have imagined. Chaos exposes weakness in control. They think control is a fortress, a steel cage around their power, unbreachable and permanent, a place where loyalty, fear, and deception can be stacked like bricks until nothing moves, but in the directions they command. But chaos is the solvent that eats through their meticulous planning, the invisible hand that rearranges every piece of their kingdom, while they scramble to maintain the illusion of mastery. They spend their lives perfecting order, measuring influence, predicting reactions, and yet the smallest disruption, the slightest twist, can make the entire construct wobble. And you, with your audacity, your disregard for their rules, your grin as the world tilts beneath their feet, become the embodiment of that chaos. It doesn't matter how many rules they wrote, how many threats they whispered, how many allies they groomed. Chaos doesn't follow etiquette. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care. It slips into the gaps they ignored, exploits the assumptions they believed unbreakable, and amplifies every flaw they tried to hide. Control, they believed, was a shield, but it is fragile, paper-thin when pressure is applied in unexpected ways, and their attempts to stabilize it only reveal more cracks. Every order they shout, every command they enforce, Every mandate they impose becomes a reaction, not a strategy. A desperate attempt to patch the holes that are growing faster than they can manage. And the beauty of chaos is subtlety. It doesn't always announce itself with a bang. Sometimes it's a whisper, a shift in loyalty, a hesitation in someone they trusted, a misstep that seems insignificant until it cascades into catastrophe. You move through this turbulence like a predator who doesn't need the fight, letting the environment do the work, letting the seeds of disorder sprout in their absence of foresight. They thrived on predictability, on fear that could be measured and manipulated, on compliance that could be bought or coerced. But chaos ignores expectations. It bends probability, distorts timelines, and makes even the most confident leaders question themselves, their allies, their decisions. Every layer of control they erected to suppress uncertainty becomes a trap, a mirror reflecting every miscalculation, every arrogance, every overreach. And while they scramble to reassert authority, you watch, unmoved, letting the chaos perform the dismantling work they never anticipated. Alliances fracture under the strain, whispers become accusations, confidence turn into spies, and every plan, no matter how cunning, is tested against an unpredictable variable you embody effortlessly. The more they try to tighten their grip, the looser it becomes, because control cannot exist where uncertainty reigns. It is not a matter of force, but of exposure. Show the cracks, let the instability reveal itself, and suddenly the fortress they relied upon is a stage for panic and disarray. Fear, when combined with chaos, is no longer a tool but a liability. Intimidation fails when the walls of certainty crumble, and every gesture meant to enforce loyalty only highlights the fragility of their reign. Their obsession with dominance blinds them to the truth that chaos is inevitable, and anyone willing to embrace it becomes untouchable, unpredictable, unstoppable. You don't need to attack. You just need to exist in a way that defies their expectations, letting disorder seep into every corner of their meticulously arranged world, amplifying doubts, magnifying mistakes, and forcing them to confront the reality that control was never theirs to hold, only to imagine, and every illusion of authority is weakened by the presence of someone who laughs as the walls tremble. Someone who understands that the collapse is not an accident, but a performance of inevitability, orchestrated simply by refusing to bow to the order they demanded. Victory is psychological as much as physical. They think strength is measured in muscle, in armies, in the number of people who obey without question. But the real battlefield exists in the mind, in the quiet moments where fear gnaws at confidence, where doubt whispers louder than strategy, where perception dictates reality more than any weapon could. You understand that better than they ever could. You move through the chaos not with force alone, but with presence, with the subtle manipulation of their expectations, the twisting of their assumptions, the quiet smiles that make them question every step they took, every word they spoke, every choice they thought absolute. The body can be restrained, attacked, beaten, but the mind is where empires rise and fall, and you target it without mercy. They build walls, towers, alliances, thinking that control over flesh equates to control over thought. But thoughts are fragile, vulnerable to the insinuation, the pause, the grin that says you see what they refuse to admit. Every victory they imagined, every triumph they believed would cement their supremacy, can be dismantled by the slow, deliberate erosion of certainty. When you challenge perception, when you force them to question what they held true, the battlefield shifts, the rules change. And suddenly they are reacting to shadows, to possibilities, to the fear of what you might do next, and the weight of indecision crushes them more effectively than any blade. Psychological dominance is subtle but absolute. It doesn't scream, it seeps, it infects, and by the time they realize their footing is gone, the collapse is already in motion. You twist the knife not by attacking directly, but by making them doubt themselves, making them doubt their allies, making them doubt the very reality they thought they controlled. Fear, hesitation, paranoia, these are weapons sharper than any sword, and you wield them without ceremony, without announcement, letting the chaos of the mind do the work the body could never achieve alone. Each glance, each calculated pause, each contradiction you expose becomes a seed of uncertainty, and as it grows, their carefully constructed dominance begins to crumble from within. They try to impose logic where none exists, to demand obedience where loyalty is fractured, to assert strength where their confidence has eroded, and every action they take only reveals the fragility you already knew. Psychological victory is intoxicating because it leaves them exposed in ways physical domination cannot. It forces them to confront themselves, to see the cracks in their own armor, to feel the inadequacy they masked with arrogance. It is not about humiliation, not about gloating. Though the temptation is delicious, it is about inevitability, about revealing the truth that no fortress built on fear and control is unassailable. Even the most disciplined, the most calculated, the most ruthless of them can be undone when they realize that their perception of control was an illusion, a mirage feeding their ego, and you are the reflection showing them what they refuse to face. Your presence alone shifts the balance, because dominance is not held in the fist, but in the mind of those who believe in it. You create cracks, and those cracks become canyons, and suddenly their certainty collapses under the weight of possibility, under the pressure of an intelligence and audacity they underestimated. Each hesitation, each glance that searches for allies who aren't there, each fleeting thought that whispers, "I misjudged them," is a victory, a psychological blow more profound than any physical strike could ever be. And the beauty of it is that it spreads. The fear you cultivate, the doubt you introduce, the perception you manipulate, it moves faster than armies, travels farther than threats, and leaves them scrambling, reacting to a reality you control not by brute force, but by showing them the truth they can't unsee. A truth that victory is as much a matter of the mind as of the body, and anyone who masters it can bend worlds, without touching a single soul directly. Bloodlines inherit the collapse of their masters. They think power is eternal, a chain passed down through influence, privilege, and fear, a legacy carved in stone that will outlive the frailty of flesh and the recklessness of choice. But nothing lasts forever. Every empire built on deception, every throne held by intimidation, every kingdom propped up by loyalty purchased, rather than earned, carries within it the seeds of its own ruin, and those seeds are inherited by the ones who follow, whether they realize it or not. The heirs of manipulation, the descendants of control, are burdened with more than expectation. They inherit fragility, weakness, and the echoes of every failure they did not witness firsthand. When a master falls, the impact doesn't vanish with them. It resonates like a tremor running through stone, like a poison in the bloodstream, corrupting the foundations of everything that came after. You don't have to confront the successors directly. The collapse has already begun. Their confidence, their authority, their sense of invulnerability is borrowed, and when the original source crumbles, the illusion shatters, leaving them exposed in ways they cannot anticipate. Every tradition, every rule, every whispered command meant to preserve control becomes a weight, a reminder of the instability that was always there, waiting for the right moment to surface. You become that moment, that force that ensures the inheritance of weakness is visible, undeniable, unavoidable. They try to maintain the facade, to stand on the shoulders of giants who were never truly secure, to cling to titles and influence that are hollow, and every attempt reveals the cracks, the fractures, the inevitability of decline. Bloodlines, like empires, are only as strong as the foundation that birthed them, and foundations built on fear, lies, and exploitation can never withstand the reality you impose. Even the most cautious, the most calculating heirs stumble, because the collapse isn't always physical. It is psychological, social, emotional, a ripple effect that reaches farther than they imagined, touching allies, rivals and enemies alike. The past becomes a chain, and the weight of inherited weakness presses down, until the smallest disruption, the tiniest act of audacity, is enough to make the structure sway. You watch as they attempt to navigate a world already destabilized, trying to uphold authority they never earned, trying to wield power that was never truly theirs, and every misstep, every hesitation, every doubt becomes a testament to the inevitability of inherited collapse. The arrogance of believing that blood alone confers strength is deliciously ironic, because it blinds them to the fractures beneath their feet. They repeat the mistakes of their predecessors, reassemble the miscalculations, and in doing so, accelerate the implosion, unaware that the foundation is already rotting, that the inheritance they clutch so tightly is a legacy of ruin. And as they scramble, as they stumble and lash out, as they attempt to assert control over what is inherently uncontrollable, the collapse spreads outward, infecting every alliance, every network, every bond of loyalty that relied on the illusion of continuity. History, in this sense, is a weapon, and you wield it without ceremony, showing that the sins of the past, the failures of those who came before, do not vanish. They linger, they shape, they define, and when someone rises with intent, awareness, and audacity, they ensure that the weight of inherited fragility is felt by all who follow. Power is never truly secure, legacy is never guaranteed, and bloodlines, no matter how noble or feared, inherit the consequences of what came before, whether they recognize it or not. You don't need to strike directly at them. Your presence, your challenge, your refusal to yield, is enough to make them confront the reality that their inheritance is a trap, that the empire they thought theirs to claim is already decaying, and that the collapse of their masters has become a storm they cannot escape, a shadow that follows them in every step, every decision, every whispered conversation, shaping their destiny in ways they were never prepared to face.